If you doubt me, ask the old family. They know how much love, sacrifice, and truth I've given. This is not just a story. It's love, it's pain, it's us, forever. October rain drummed against the windows of Sunset Cafe as Peter William stepped inside, shaking droplets from his charcoal suit. 28 years old, with calloused hands that built dreams into reality, he moved with the quiet confidence of a self-made man. His construction company was small but growing, and today's government meeting could change everything. All he needed was coffee and 15 minutes to review his presentation. Peter had been awake since 4 a.m., fine-tuning proposals that could secure his first major contract. 3 years of 12-hour days, living on instant ramen and determination, had led to this moment. Success felt close enough to taste, if he could just stay focused for a few more hours. Then he saw her. Valerie sat by the rain-streaked window, 24 and luminous in morning light. Her dark skin glowed warm against a cream sweater, natural hair pulled into an elegant twist. She sketched something in a leather portfolio, absorbed in her work, her tongue peeking out slightly in concentration. When she glanced up and caught him staring, her smile transformed the crowded cafe into something intimate and magical. Time fractured. Peter had dated plenty, ambitious women who understood his drive, beautiful women who appreciated his potential. But this felt different, like recognition, like destiny reaching out to rearrange his carefully planned life. His presentation suddenly seemed less important than learning what made this woman's eyes sparkle with such intelligence and warmth. His feet carried him forward without permission, his usual business confidence deserting him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice slightly hoarse with sudden nervousness. "I don't normally approach strangers, but you looked so—" He gestured at her sketch, words failing him for the first time in years. Her laugh was music, warm, genuine, unguarded. "So what? Antisocial, weird, dangerously caffeinated." "Captivating," he said simply, the word carrying more weight than any business proposal he'd ever written. Pink bloomed across her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Instead, she studied his face with an artist's attention to detail, as if memorizing the exact shade of his eyes, the way sincerity changed his entire expression. "I'm Valerie," she said, closing her portfolio with deliberate care. "Peter." When their hands touched, electricity coursed between them, not just attraction, but something deeper, more permanent. She felt it too, her eyes widened slightly, her breath catching in a way that made his heart race. "Would you like to sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Unless you have somewhere earth-shatteringly important to be." Peter thought of the meeting that could make his career, the presentation he'd rehearsed 100 times, the government contract worth more money than he'd ever imagined. Then he looked at this woman who just turned his world upside down with a single smile. "Nowhere more important than here," he said, settling into the chair and discovering that sometimes the most important decisions happen in heartbeats, not boardrooms. For the next 3 hours, they talked like old souls, recognizing each other across lifetimes. Valerie was a graphic designer with dreams of opening her own studio, creating art that moved people rather than just selling products. Peter shared his vision of building not just structures, but communities where families could flourish and dreams could take root. "I want to create something that lasts," Peter said, his eyes lighting up as he described affordable housing projects that could change neighborhoods. "Buildings that don't just shelter bodies, but nurture souls." "That's beautiful," Valerie replied, her admiration genuine. "Most people build for profit. You want to build for purpose." They discovered synchronicities that felt like signs. Both had lost their fathers young. Both dreamed of large families. Both believed that success meant nothing without people to share it with. When Valerie mentioned her love of terrible poetry, Peter confessed he wrote it himself. badly but with genuine feeling. "I have to go," Valerie finally said, glancing at her watch with obvious reluctance. "I have a client meeting that could change my career." Peter's heart sank, but then she smiled, the kind of smile that rewrites entire futures. "Can I see you again?" he asked, desperation making his voice rougher. "Tonight?" "Tomorrow. I know this sounds insane, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." Valerie's smile could have powered the entire city. "Tonight," she said, writing her number on a napkin in elegant script that he would frame and keep forever. "But Peter." "Yes?" "Don't change who you are for anyone, including me. Promise me that." As she walked away, Peter clutched that napkin like a sacred text, knowing with absolute certainty that his life had just been divided into two distinct chapters, watching him flip a pancake that looked more like abstract art. "But talented in other areas," Peter countered, pulling her close to prove his point. "Much more talented," she agreed against his mouth. Peter discovered poetry, terrible, wonderful verses that made Valerie cry happy tears. He'd hide them everywhere, taped to her car windshield, slipped into her work bag, tucked between pages of books she was reading. "Your laugh breaks morning open. Your touch rebuilds my world. Without you, I'm half finished. With you, I'm finally whole." "This is absolutely dreadful poetry," Valerie told him one evening, tears streaming as she read his latest attempt. "I know, I'm a contractor, not Shakespeare. It's the most beautiful, terrible poem anyone's ever written for me." Meanwhile, Valerie filled sketchbooks with Peter's image, his hands building, his profile in concentration, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. During boring client meetings, she'd draw him from memory while her co-workers teased mercilessly. In her private moments, she practiced writing Mrs. Valerie William in elegant script, imagining white dresses and shared surnames and children with his gentle eyes. Their physical relationship deepened slowly, reverently. Every touch felt electric, every kiss a promise of forever. When they finally made love during an April thunderstorm, rain drumming against windows while they discovered each other with trembling hands and whispered declarations. "Are you certain?" Peter asked, his hands framing her face like she was something precious that might break. "I've never been more certain of anything," Valerie breathed, pulling him closer. They moved together like puzzle pieces, finding their perfect fit, urgent yet patient, passionate yet tender. Lightning illuminated tears of joy on Valerie's cheeks. "I love you," she whispered as they moved together. "I love you with everything I am." Afterward, they lay tangled while the storm raged outside, both understanding they'd crossed into something permanent, something sacred. "That was," Peter began. "Everything," Valerie finished. "Everything I didn't know I was waiting for." The spring festival in May became the defining moment of their relationship. Peter had been planning for weeks, secretly coordinating with the festival organizers. When darkness fell and the lantern lighting ceremony began, Valerie gasped as hundreds of paper lanterns rose into the night sky, arranged to spell out, "I love you, Valerie," in glowing letters against the stars. "Peter," she breathed, tears streaming down her face as the entire crowd turned to look at them. "I wanted everyone to know," he said, pulling her close. "I wanted the whole world to know that I'm hopelessly forever in love with you." She kissed him then, right there in front of hundreds of strangers, pouring all her love into that kiss while the crowd cheered and the lanterns drifted toward heaven. Their friends watched their relationship with a mixture of envy and awe. Peter and Valerie had that rare connection that everyone dreams of. They finished each other's sentences, communicated with just glances, seemed to operate on the same wavelength. At parties, they'd gravitate toward each other like magnets, unable to stay apart for long. "You two are disgustingly perfect together," Valerie's best friend Sarah complained one evening, watching Peter automatically hand Valerie a sweater when she shivered slightly. "How did he even know you were cold?" Sarah's boyfriend Mark asked in amazement. "He always knows," Valerie said simply, smiling as Peter wrapped the sweater around her shoulders and pressed a kiss to her temple. They'd started talking about the future with absolute certainty. Not if they got married, but when. Not if they had children, but how many and what they'd name them. Peter had already mentally designed their dream house, a place with big windows for Valerie's art studio and a garden where their children could play. "I want at least 3 kids," Valerie said one lazy Sunday afternoon, her head in Peter's lap as he played with her hair. "I want whatever makes you happy," Peter replied, "though I'm hoping for a little girl who looks exactly like her mother. And I want a little boy with his father's kind heart and gentle hands." They'd lie like that for hours, planning their perfect future, believing with absolute faith that nothing could ever break what they'd built together. Their love felt invincible, eternal, written in the stars themselves. Peter had already started looking at engagement rings, imagining the moment he'd get down on one knee and ask Valerie to be his wife. He knew with absolute certainty that she'd say yes, just like he knew the sun would rise tomorrow. Their love was that sure, that solid, that unbreakable, or so they believed. By the end of 6 months, Peter, William and Valerie had created something beautiful and rare. A love story that seemed destined for fairy tale endings. They were best friends, passionate lovers, and soulmates who'd found each other against all odds. Neither could imagine anything ever coming between them. Their love felt too strong, too pure, too perfect to ever be threatened. They were young, they were in love, and they were certain that their happy ending was guaranteed. Chapter 3. Forever begins. Today. 18 months of loving Valerie had taught Peter William what poets meant when they wrote about souls recognizing their missing half. He'd carried his grandmother's ring for 3 weeks, a symbol of 67 years of marriage that had ended only when death claimed his grandfather, waiting for the perfect moment to ask the woman who'd become his entire universe to marry him. The plan consumed him for days. He recreated their first date location by the lake, but transformed it into something from fairy tales. Rose petals carpeting the shoreline, candles flickering between trees, a string quartet hidden behind willows. Every detail mattered, because this moment would define the rest of their lives. Saturday evening arrived warm and golden. Peter collected Valerie with trembling hands, his heart hammering so violently he was certain she could hear it. "You seem nervous," Valerie observed, squeezing his fingers as they drove toward the lake. "Your hands are actually shaking." "Just thinking," Peter said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "About what?" "About how much I love you. About how you've changed my world." When they reached the lake, Valerie gasped. Thousands of rose petals created a pathway leading to their sacred spot, now surrounded by flickering candles and fairy lights strung like stars between branches. The quartet played softly, filling evening air with music that sounded like love itself. "Peter," Valerie whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. "What is all this?" "This," Peter said, his voice thick with emotion, "is where my life really began. 18 months ago, right here, I fell in love with the most incredible woman in the world." He led her down the rose-petal path, both of them walking slowly as memories flooded back. The spot where they'd shared their first real conversation. The tree where he'd first kissed her. The patch of grass where she'd first told him she loved him. When they reached the center of the romantic display, Peter stopped and turned to face her. Valerie's eyes were already brimming with tears. She knew what was coming, but the reality overwhelmed every dream. "Valerie," Peter began, his voice breaking with emotion as he dropped to one knee. The quartet played their song, the melody from their first dance. Before you, I was sleepwalking through life. You awakened something in me I didn't know existed. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every single day." The diamond caught the candlelight, throwing rainbow sparks across her tear-streaked face. "This ring represents my grandparents' love story. 67 years of choosing each other through everything life brought them. Grandma made me promise to save it for the woman who would complete my soul." His voice shattered. "Valerie, you are my missing piece, my answered prayer, my forever person. Will you marry me and let me spend my lifetime proving how grateful I am that you exist?" Valerie was sobbing now, nodding frantically before she could even find her voice. "Yes," she finally managed through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Peter, I love you so much I can barely breathe. Of course I'll marry you." Peter slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then swept her up into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried and covered his face with kisses. The quartet played triumphantly as rose petals swirled around them in the evening breeze. "I can't believe you did all this," Valerie whispered against his lips. "It's like something from a movie." "You deserve a movie," Peter replied, setting her down but keeping her pressed close against him. "You deserve everything beautiful in this world, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." They danced there by the lake until the stars came out, lost in each other and their perfect happiness. When they finally went home, they made love with a new intensity, a new certainty. They belonged to each other now, officially and forever. The wedding 6 months later was everything they'd dreamed of and more. Valerie was radiant in a flowing silk gown that made her look like a princess, her natural beauty so stunning that guests gasped when she walked down the aisle. Peter stood at the altar in a midnight blue tuxedo, tears streaming down his face as he watched his bride approach. They'd written their own vows, pouring their hearts onto paper in words that left few dry eyes in the church. "Peter," Valerie said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears, "you are my miracle. You taught me that fairy tales are real, that true love exists, that someone can love you so deeply it changes who you are. I promise to love you through every season of our lives, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, to be your partner in all adventures, and to never ever take for granted the gift of your love. I promise to choose you every day in every way for the rest of my life." Peter's voice was thick with emotion as he responded, "Valerie, my beautiful wife, you are the answer to every prayer I never knew how to pray. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me, kind, strong, worthy of your incredible love. I promise to protect your heart as carefully as you've trusted me with it. I promise to love you more tomorrow than I do today, and more next year than I do tomorrow. I promise that nothing, absolutely nothing, will ever come between us or shake the foundation of what we've built together. You are my forever, and I am yours." The kiss that sealed their marriage was passionate and tender, full of promise and absolute devotion. Their guests cheered as they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Mr. and Mrs. William, ready to begin their beautiful life together. The reception lasted until dawn, with Peter and Valerie dancing like they were the only two people in the world. They swayed to romantic ballads, laughed through upbeat songs, and held each other close during the last dance of the evening. "How does it feel to be Mrs. William?" Peter asked as they danced to their wedding song. "Like coming home," Valerie whispered back, "like the first day of forever." Their honeymoon in Italy was pure magic. 2 weeks of exploring ancient cities, making love in luxury hotels, and planning their perfect future. They talked about the house they'd build, the children they'd have, the life they'd create together. "I want our daughter to have your eyes," Peter said one evening as they watched the sunset over the Mediterranean. "And I want our son to have your gentle heart," Valerie replied, curled against his side. When they returned home, they threw themselves into building their life together. Peter's business was growing rapidly, and Valerie supported him while pursuing her own artistic dreams. They bought a charming house with a garden where Valerie could paint and Peter could plan his future empire. Every morning began with coffee together on their porch. Every evening ended with them falling asleep in each other's arms. They hosted dinner parties for friends, took weekend trips to explore new places, and spent quiet evenings just talking and dreaming. "We're so blessed," Valerie said one night as they lay in bed, her head on Peter's chest while he played with her hair. "Blessed?" Peter asked. "To have found this, to have found each other. Some people search their whole lives for what we have." "We're not just blessed," Peter corrected softly. "We're living proof that fairy tales can come true, and I'm going to make sure we never take it for granted." 2 years into their marriage, when Valerie told Peter she was pregnant, they both cried with joy. Their daughter was born on a perfect spring morning, tiny and beautiful and perfect in every way. They named her young Valerie after her mother, and Peter cried as he held his little girl for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered. His daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. "She's perfect, just like her mother." "She has your eyes," Valerie observed from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant with happiness. "And your strength," Peter replied. "She's going to be incredible." As their daughter grew, their love only deepened. Family dinners filled with laughter, weekend trips to the park, bedtime stories read in silly voices. They created a home full of love and security. Peter, William, and Valerie had built something beautiful together, a marriage based on passionate love, complete trust, and absolute devotion. They believed with all their hearts that nothing could ever threaten what they'd created. They had no idea how wrong they were. Chapter 4. Building Dreams Together. 16 years of marriage had transformed the Williams family into everything Peter and Valerie had dreamed during those early passionate nights of planning their future. Their daughter, young Valerie, now 16 and brilliant, was living proof that fairy tales could become reality. Peter's construction company had evolved beyond his wildest ambitions. William Construction dominated the East Coast, with government contracts worth hundreds of millions and projects spanning internationally. The boy who'd once mixed concrete by hand now commanded an empire, his signature on buildings across 12 states. Success had been kind to them. Their Georgian mansion sat on 15 acres of manicured perfection, 8 bedrooms, guest cottage, gardens that Valerie had designed with an artist's eye for beauty. The garage held luxury vehicles they'd once only imagined owning. "Sometimes I can't believe this is our life," Valerie said one morning, standing in their marble kitchen that rivaled 5-star restaurants. At 38, motherhood and happiness had given her a glow that stopped strangers in their tracks. Her art studio occupied the mansion's east wing, filled with paintings of the life they'd built together. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up back in that tiny apartment, wondering if I dreamed all this," Peter replied, wrapping his arms around his wife as they watched their daughter practice piano in the sunroom. Young Valerie had inherited the best of both parents, her mother's artistic sensitivity and her father's strategic mind. Honor roll student, debate team captain, already receiving recruitment letters from Harvard and Yale. At 16, she possessed the kind of wisdom that made adults pause and really listen. "She's going to change the world someday," Valerie said proudly, watching their daughter's graceful fingers dance across the piano keys. "She already changed mine," Peter replied. "Both of you did." The William family's weekly routine had become a carefully orchestrated ballet of success. Monday mornings meant family breakfast on the terrace overlooking their rose garden, where Peter would share stories from his latest construction projects while Valerie discussed her upcoming art exhibitions. Young Valerie would contribute her own news, academic achievements, social events, college preparation plans. Harvard sent another recruitment letter, young Valerie announced one Tuesday morning, sliding the prestigious envelope across the breakfast table. "They're really interested in my portfolio." "Of course they are," Peter beamed with paternal pride. "You're brilliant, sweetheart. You can go anywhere you want." "I want to study business and art," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe combine them somehow. Build something meaningful like you did, Dad." Peter's chest swelled with emotion. His daughter understood that true success wasn't just about money, it was about creating something that mattered, something that helped people and communities thrive. Their social calendar was packed with charity galas, business dinners, and cultural events. Valerie had become a patron of the arts, serving on museum boards and organizing fundraisers for local artists. Peter was frequently invited to speak at business conferences and university commencements, sharing his story of building an empire from humble beginnings. "The Williamses are relationship goals," their friends would say with obvious envy. At dinner parties, Peter and Valerie still gravitated toward each other like magnets, still finished each other's sentences, still shared private smiles across crowded rooms. Their love life remained passionate and tender. Despite busy schedules and parental responsibilities, they made time for each other, surprise lunch dates, weekend getaways to their vacation home in the mountains, quiet evenings dancing in their living room while young Valerie rolled her eyes and pretended to be embarrassed by her parents' obvious affection. "You two are disgusting," she'd tease, but secretly she loved seeing her parents so happy together. It gave her hope that real love actually existed, that she might someday find what her parents had. Sunday family dinners were sacred traditions that nothing was allowed to interrupt. They'd gather around the antique dining table that seated 12 but felt intimate when it was just the three of them. Peter would carve the roast while Valerie served vegetables from their own garden, and young Valerie would regale them with stories from school and her various activities. "Tell me about your week, princess," Peter would say, giving his daughter his complete attention despite the phone that buzzed with business calls. "Well, I aced my calculus test, got elected student body treasurer, and I think I'm finally ready to get my driver's license," young Valerie would reply, knowing her father hung on every word. "No dating until you're 30, Peter would joke, making both his wife and daughter laugh. "Peter William, you cannot protect her forever," Valerie would chide gently. "She's going to meet someone wonderful someday, just like I did." Their daughter was growing up surrounded by love, security, and endless possibilities. She had her own car, a safe but stylish sedan, a generous allowance that she mostly saved or donated to charity, and parents who supported every dream and ambition. Young Valerie's friends were in awe of her family's lifestyle, but she never let it go to her head. Her parents had raised her to understand that privilege came with responsibility, that wealth was meant to be shared with those less fortunate. "We're incredibly blessed," Valerie would tell her daughter during their mother-daughter shopping trips to Manhattan. "But we must never forget that with great blessings come great responsibilities to help others." The William Family Foundation, established when Peter's business first became profitable, now donated millions annually to education, housing assistance, and arts programs. Young Valerie had been involved since childhood, helping to select scholarship recipients and visiting the homes they'd helped build for families in need. Peter's business success had afforded them incredible experiences. Family vacations to Europe, where they'd explore art museums and historical sites. Ski trips to Colorado, where Peter taught his daughter to navigate challenging slopes, while Valerie preferred the cozy lodge with hot chocolate and a good book. Summer weeks at their beach house in the Hamptons, where they'd host extended family and close friends. "I want her to see the world," Peter told Valerie one evening as they planned young Valerie's graduation trip. "I want her to understand how big and beautiful life can be." "She already understands," Valerie replied. "Look how she's turned out. Confident but humble, ambitious but kind. We've raised an incredible human being." Their marriage had only grown stronger through the years of success. They'd weathered the typical challenges: sleepless nights with a teething baby, financial stress during the company's early expansion, the normal ups and downs of any long-term relationship. But they'd faced everything together, their bond deepening with each shared experience. Peter still wrote Valerie terrible poems on special occasions, and she still sketched him when she thought he wasn't looking. They still danced in their kitchen on Saturday mornings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still made love with the passion of newlyweds, despite being together for nearly 2 decades. "Do you ever regret giving up your graphic design career?" Peter asked one evening as they walked through Valerie's art studio, surrounded by paintings that galleries were begging to exhibit. "Never," Valerie said firmly. "This life we've built together, this family, this love, it's more beautiful than anything I could have created on my own." Their friends often asked for the secret to their happiness, the key to maintaining such obvious love and respect after so many years together. "We never stopped dating each other," Valerie would explain. "We never stopped being grateful for what we have." "We remember that we're best friends first," Peter would add. "Everything else flows from that foundation." As young Valerie approached graduation and prepared for college, both parents felt the bittersweet mixture of pride and impending loss. Their little girl was becoming a remarkable woman, ready to make her own mark on the world. "She's going to be fine," Valerie said one night as they watched their daughter through the window, studying intently at her desk. "More than fine. She's going to be extraordinary." "Just like her mother," Peter replied, kissing his wife's temple. The William family had built something beautiful together, a life of love, success, and shared dreams. They had everything anyone could want: financial security, a gorgeous home, a brilliant daughter, and a marriage that had only grown stronger with time. They believed their happiness was unshakable, their love unbreakable, their future unlimited. They had no idea that their perfect world was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Chapter 5. The Slow Poison of Success. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It crept into Peter Williams' soul like carbon monoxide, invisible, odorless, deadly. It started with a single missed dinner in March. The Soul Project needed immediate attention, and Peter made what felt like a reasonable choice: one night of disappointment to secure their family's future. Valerie understood. Young Valerie, now 16, rolled her eyes but forgave him. "Rain check on family game night?" Peter asked, already reaching for his coat. "Of course," Valerie smiled, though something flickered in her eyes. "We'll save Monopoly for tomorrow." Tomorrow became next week. Next week became a pattern. By June, Peter's home office had metastasized into a command center that never slept. 8 monitors displayed real-time data from projects spanning 4 continents. His phone buzzed every 30 seconds with decisions only he could make, crises only he could solve, opportunities only he could seize. "The Pentagon wants the Syrian base operational 6 months early," Peter barked into his headset one Tuesday morning, pacing like a caged animal while Valerie knocked softly with breakfast he wouldn't eat. "I don't care if we need 6 crews working Christmas. This contract is worth $800 million. He waved her away without looking up, missing the hurt that flashed across her face, missing how her shoulders sagged as she retreated with the untouched coffee that had gone cold in her hands. That evening, Peter found Valerie in their garden, deadheading roses in the fading light. Something about her posture, resigned, solitary, made him pause. "Hey," he said softly, remembering suddenly that they hadn't really talked in days. "How was your day?" "Fine," she replied without looking up, her voice carrying a distance that hadn't been there before. "The gallery wants 3 more paintings for the spring exhibition." "That's wonderful," Peter said, but his phone buzzed and his attention fractured. Dubai. Environmental permits. Time sensitive. "I should take this," he said, already stepping away. "It's important." They're all important, Valerie said quietly. But Peter was already gone. The real poison began in July, when success started feeling like a drug Peter couldn't refuse. Each deal fed his ego, each contract validated his worth, each victory proved he was special, chosen, destined for greatness that ordinary men couldn't achieve. The irony was devastating. The harder he worked to provide for his family, the less present he became for them. The more successful he grew, the emptier his personal life became. But the rush of conquest, the intoxication of power, the validation of being needed and important and indispensable, it filled the growing void inside him with artificial purpose. "Dad, can you help me with my college essay?" young Valerie asked one evening, catching him between calls. Peter looked up from his laptop, seeing his daughter as if for the first time in weeks. When had she gotten so tall? When had that serious adult expression replaced her childish enthusiasm? "Of course, Princess," he said, closing the laptop with genuine intention. "What's it about?" "Describing someone who inspires me," she said, settling beside him on the couch. "I was thinking about writing about you, about how you built something from nothing, how you never gave up on your dreams." Peter's chest swelled with pride and love. This was what mattered. This was why he worked so hard. His phone rang. Beijing. The foundation permits were being challenged, threatening a $2 billion infrastructure project. Peter stared at the phone, then at his daughter's hopeful face. The call could wait 10 minutes. Surely it could wait. But what if it couldn't? What if 10 minutes of delay cost them the entire contract? What if his absence from one crucial call undid months of negotiation? "I have to take this," he said, hating himself even as he reached for the phone. "It's Beijing. The permits are—" "It's okay, Dad," young Valerie said, but her voice had changed. Disappointment masked as understanding. "I know business is important. Give me 30 minutes, Peter promised. Then we'll work on your essay together." The call lasted 2 hours. By the time he finished, young Valerie was asleep on the couch, her laptop open to a half-written essay that began, "My father taught me that dreams require sacrifice, but I'm beginning to wonder if some sacrifices cost more than they're worth." Peter closed her laptop and carried his daughter to bed, promising himself he'd make it up to her tomorrow. But tomorrow brought new crises, new opportunities, new reasons why family time had to wait. The breaking point came in September during Valerie's art exhibition opening, her first solo show in 5 years. She'd worked for months preparing, pouring her heart into paintings that captured their family's happier times. "You'll be there, right?" she asked over breakfast, her voice carrying a vulnerability that should have broken his heart. "The opening is at 7. You promised." "Wouldn't miss it," Peter said, meaning it sincerely. "This is your night, sweetheart. Nothing's more important than supporting your dreams." At 6:30 p.m., Peter was adjusting his tie, genuinely excited to celebrate his wife's talent, when his phone exploded with crisis. The Seoul labor strikes had escalated. $2 billion hung in the balance. The Korean partners needed immediate reassurance or they'd walk. Peter stared at his reflection in the mirror, tie half-knotted, torn between two worlds that suddenly felt impossible to reconcile. He made the call. At 7 p.m., Valerie stood beside her paintings, beautiful works depicting their family's love story, explaining to concerned friends why her husband wasn't there. "He's handling a crisis," she said with practiced grace, but Peter knew she was dying inside. He arrived at 9:30, the exhibition nearly over, guilt crushing his chest as he saw Valerie's forced smile. "I'm so sorry," he began, but she cut him off with a kiss that tasted like tears. "It's okay," she lied. "I know how important your work is." But it wasn't okay. That night, Peter found her crying in their bathroom, shoulders shaking with grief that had nothing to do with tears. "Val, what's wrong?" he asked, though he knew. I feel like I'm competing with your business for my own husband, she whispered, and I'm losing. We're both losing. Peter wanted to argue, to explain about responsibilities and pressures she didn't understand. But looking at his wife, really looking, he saw what his choices had cost them. The light in her eyes had dimmed. The spontaneous joy that had made him fall in love with her was buried under resignation and loneliness. I'll do better, he promised, pulling her close. I'll find balance. I'll remember what's really important. And he meant it. For 3 days, Peter tried to be the husband and father he'd once been. He worked reasonable hours, had dinner with his family, helped young Valerie with college applications. It felt like coming home to himself. Then Dubai called with an opportunity that would double their revenue overnight. The window was narrow. 48 hours to submit a proposal that would establish them as the premier international contractor. Peter stared at his phone as it rang, his family's laughter drifting from the kitchen where they were making pancakes together. He could ignore it. He could choose them. But the rush of possibility, the intoxication of potential success, the fear of losing ground to competitors, it all crashed over him like a wave. He answered the call. Peter Williams speaking. Yes, I'm very interested in discussing the Dubai expansion. From that moment, Peter began choosing success over family systematically, methodically, unconsciously. Each decision felt reasonable in isolation, but together they built a wall between him and the people he loved. He missed young Valerie's debate tournament finals. Dad's negotiating with government officials, Valerie explained to their daughter's disappointed face. He cancelled their anniversary dinner. The Soul Project needs immediate attention, he told his wife. We'll celebrate next weekend. They never did. He forgot Valerie's birthday entirely until his assistant reminded him at noon. The guilt gifts, expensive jewelry, luxury spa treatments, felt like bandages on severed arteries. I don't want gifts, Valerie told him after another apologetic delivery. I want my husband back. I want the man who used to write me terrible poems and dance with me in our kitchen. I'm building something for our family, Peter replied, already reaching for his buzzing phone. Everything I do is for you and young Valerie. But that was the lie he told himself to justify choosing everything above the people he claimed to love. Success had become his master, and Peter served it with religious devotion while his family slowly starved for his attention. The worst part wasn't the missed events or forgotten anniversaries. It was how Peter's fundamental character began changing under the pressure of constant decision-making and the intoxication of power. Patience disappeared first. The gentle man who'd once helped Valerie work through her insecurities became sharp and dismissive when conversations didn't move at business speed. Can we discuss this later? Became his response to everything. Young Valerie's questions about college, Valerie's concerns about their marriage, invitations to social events that had once brought them joy. Empathy followed. The man who'd once noticed every nuance of his wife's moods now treated her emotions like inefficiencies to be managed rather than feelings to be honored. You're being overly dramatic, he told Valerie when she tried to explain how lonely their marriage had become. I'm working for our future. You should be grateful, not resentful. The cruelest change was how Peter began measuring everything in terms of profit and loss, including his relationships. Time spent with family became time not spent building wealth. Emotional conversations became distractions from important work. Love became a luxury he couldn't afford, rather than the foundation that made success meaningful. By December, Peter had everything he'd thought he wanted: a billion-dollar empire, international recognition, power that opened every door. But he'd lost everything that actually mattered: his wife's trust, his daughter's respect, and his own soul. The man who'd once promised that nothing would come between them had allowed ambition to build walls around his heart that even love couldn't penetrate. He was becoming exactly what he'd once feared, successful but empty, wealthy but poor in everything that actually mattered. The stage was set for the betrayal that would complete his transformation from the man Valerie had married into someone she no longer recognized. A husband who no longer made time for his wife's emotional needs, who'd replaced intimate connection with expensive gifts, who valued business deals more than family moments, was perfectly positioned for the kind of devastating choices that destroy marriages forever. Peter Williams was about to discover that when you stop feeding love, it doesn't disappear, it dies, and something else, something hungry and selfish and destructive, grows in its place. Chapter 6. Cracks in Paradise. The first crack in Peter's perfect life appeared wearing Armani and wielding a Harvard MBA like a weapon. Rebecca Martinez entered Peter's world during a classified Pentagon briefing where billion-dollar defense contracts were discussed in soundproof rooms by people who understood that power was the ultimate aphrodisiac. She was everything Valerie wasn't: cold where his wife was warm, calculating where Valerie was trusting, predatory where his wife was nurturing. At 38, Rebecca had perfected the art of seduction through professional necessity. Corporate consulting required reading men's weaknesses instantly, exploiting their vulnerabilities for profit. She'd destroyed 3 marriages during her career climb, leaving a trail of broken executives who'd confused business manipulation with personal attraction. Rebecca specialized in successful men who'd grown bored with their comfortable lives. Her psychological profile was precise: target powerful men experiencing marital distance, validate their importance in ways their wives no longer did, then exploit the emotional void that career obsession had created in their hearts. Peter Williams represented her greatest challenge yet: a billionaire with an apparently stable marriage, genuine love for his family, and enough moral foundation to resist obvious temptation. Rebecca studied him for weeks before their first meeting, researching his background, analyzing his psychological profile, identifying the exact pressure points that would make him vulnerable to her particular brand of destruction. "Mr. William," Rebecca said after the Pentagon briefing, her handshake lingering provocatively while she made direct eye contact that lasted precisely 3 seconds longer than professional courtesy required. "I've studied your overseas expansion extensively. Impressive trajectory, ruthless execution when necessary. My consulting firm specializes in companies ready to think beyond conventional limitations." She'd chosen her words carefully. Ruthless appealed to his business ego. Beyond conventional limitations suggested she understood his ambition in ways his suburban wife never could. Every gesture was calculated to plant seeds of dissatisfaction with his current life, while positioning herself as the sophisticated alternative he didn't know he was craving. "I'm always interested in expanding my reach," Peter replied, studying her longer than was professional. His marriage had become predictable: morning coffee and evening wine, familiar conversations about familiar problems. Rebecca represented something his comfortable life no longer provided: the thrill of conquest, the intoxication of forbidden desire, the validation that he was still attractive to women who had choices. "Excellent," Rebecca smiled with predatory satisfaction. "I think we could accomplish remarkable things together. Should we discuss it over dinner? Somewhere private where we won't be interrupted by lesser concerns?" The phrasing was deliberate. Lesser concerns dismissed his family obligations as unworthy of his attention, subtly suggesting that a man of his stature deserved more sophisticated priorities than domestic responsibilities. Their first meeting took place at Le Bernardin, a restaurant where privacy was guaranteed, conversations were never overheard, and the wine list cost more than most people's monthly salary. Rebecca had reserved a corner table where candlelight would flatter her features and intimate conversation would feel natural rather than forced. She arrived 15 minutes late, a calculated move to demonstrate her own importance while creating anticipation that would make Peter more receptive to her influence. When she finally appeared, dressed in a black silk dress that suggested, rather than revealed, Peter's immediate physical response told her everything she needed to know about his vulnerability. "You're not what I expected," Rebecca observed over wine that cost more than most people's rent, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken and his wedding ring feel suddenly heavy on his finger. "Most men at your level have lost their hunger for real challenge. But you still have that edge, that drive that separates true winners from everyone else." Her fingers traced patterns on the tablecloth suggestively. "I find ambitious men who refuse to settle for ordinary, irresistible." The subtext was unmistakable, but wrapped in enough business language to maintain plausible deniability. Rebecca had perfected this approach through years of practice, creating intimacy that felt accidental rather than orchestrated, making married men feel like they were discovering attraction rather than being seduced. "Success has always required thinking beyond conventional boundaries," Peter replied, his voice slightly rougher than usual as he found himself leaning forward, drawn into her web of sophisticated temptation. "Exactly," Rebecca purred, moving her hand closer to his on the table. "Most people accept limitations imposed by domestic expectations. But truly, successful people understand that extraordinary achievement requires extraordinary choices." She was systematically undermining his marriage without directly attacking it, suggesting that Valerie and young Valerie were holding him back from his true potential rather than supporting his greatest achievements. Every word was chosen to create dissatisfaction with his current life, while positioning herself as the sophisticated upgrade he deserved. Peter left that dinner feeling more alive than he had in months, his neglected ego fed by her obvious interest and intellectual challenge. When Valerie asked about his evening over their hurried breakfast, he found himself lying with surprising ease, the deception feeling less like betrayal and more like protecting his wife from complications she wouldn't understand. "Boring government contractors discussing regulatory compliance," he said, already planning his next meeting with Rebecca. "Nothing worth discussing with someone as interesting as you." The compliment was automatic, guilt-induced, but Valerie smiled with the trusting affection of a woman who still believed her husband's lies came from consideration rather than deception. The guest house purchase came next, ostensibly for sensitive business negotiations requiring absolute privacy and security. Peter convinced himself he needed the space for legitimate reasons: international deals that required confidentiality, government contracts that demanded security clearance, high-stakes negotiations that couldn't be conducted in public spaces. The luxury property sat across town from his family home, equipped with military-grade security systems, soundproofing that ensured complete privacy, and amenities that had nothing to do with business meetings. Peter told himself the expensive furnishings and romantic lighting were necessary for impressing international clients, but he knew he was preparing a space for something far more personal than professional negotiations. "Very impressive," Rebecca said during her first visit, her appreciation obvious as she toured the elegantly furnished space with the eye of someone who understood luxury and power. "So private, so perfectly intimate for conducting delicate business." The pause before intimate was deliberate, loaded with suggestion that made Peter's chest tighten with anticipation and guilt in equal measure. "Discretion is essential in defense contracting," Peter replied, but they both understood the real purpose of this sanctuary. "Some negotiations require complete privacy to reach successful conclusions." Rebecca moved through the space like she owned it, touching surfaces and examining details with the confident familiarity of a woman who expected luxury as her natural environment. When she leaned close to point out architectural details in the contract she'd brought, her perfume overwhelmed his senses, something exotic and expensive that was nothing like Valerie's simple, natural scent. "These specifications are fascinating," she said softly, her hand resting on his arm longer than professional courtesy required, her body close enough that he could feel the heat of her skin through expensive fabric. "I think we could be extraordinary partners in this, and other ventures." The way she said "other ventures" left no doubt about her meaning, but the business context provided just enough cover for Peter to pretend this was still professional rather than personal temptation. "I'm always interested in expanding successful partnerships," Peter replied, his voice thick with desire. He was no longer trying to hide behind business language. When she kissed him, soft and testing at first, then deeper when he responded with the hunger of a man starved for passion, Peter felt like a drowning man being offered oxygen. 23 years of fidelity evaporated in that moment of weakness, destroyed by months of neglecting his marriage in favor of business obsessions that had left him emotionally vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation. "We shouldn't," he whispered against her lips, even as his hands tangled in her hair with desperate need. "Probably not," Rebecca agreed, but her actions contradicted her words as she pulled him closer, with the confidence of a woman who knew she'd already won. "But sometimes what we shouldn't do is exactly what we need to finally feel alive again." They made love on the expensive sofa Peter had purchased for client meetings, while his wife waited at home for a husband who was choosing temporary pleasure over permanent commitment. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, but it was also intoxicating. The thrill of breaking rules, the validation of being desired by someone who had options, the escape from domestic responsibilities that felt increasingly mundane compared to this sophisticated passion. "This can't happen again," he told Rebecca afterward. But even as he said it, he was already planning their next meeting, already addicted to the way she made him feel powerful and desired and important. "Of course not," she agreed with a smile that said she understood his weakness better than he understood it himself. This was just business getting a little too intense. But she knew it would happen again and again. Rebecca had perfected this seduction through years of practice, understanding exactly how to transform successful men into willing participants in their own destruction. Peter Williams was no different from the others, just another powerful man who'd confused business success with personal invincibility, another husband who'd prioritized professional achievement over emotional intelligence. Within weeks, what had started as a calculated seduction had become a full-blown affair that consumed Peter's thoughts and dominated his schedule in ways that even his billion-dollar business never had. The guest house became their sanctuary, a place where Peter could pretend he was someone else, not a husband, not a father, not a man with responsibilities, but a successful, powerful man being desired by a beautiful woman who understood his world in ways his family never could. Rebecca was everything Valerie wasn't, and she made sure Peter never forgot the comparison. Where his wife was gentle and supportive, Rebecca was aggressive and challenging. Where Valerie encouraged his dreams, Rebecca pushed him to want more, to take what he deserved regardless of who it might hurt in the process. "You're wasted in that suburban fantasy," Rebecca would whisper during their passionate afternoons together, systematically poisoning his appreciation for the life he'd built with Valerie. "A man with your power, your success, your sophistication, you deserve so much more than playing house with someone who doesn't understand your true potential." Peter found himself believing her manipulation, convincing himself that he'd outgrown his marriage rather than destroyed it through neglect. He forgot that it was his own choices that had created distance between him and Valerie, his own priorities that had reduced their passionate love to polite coexistence, his own behavior that had made him vulnerable to Rebecca's calculated seduction. The affair became his addiction, more powerful than success, more important than family, more necessary than the love he'd spent 23 years building with the woman who'd given him everything that truly mattered. The lies came easier with practice. Working late on the Dubai project became code for spending hours with Rebecca. Business dinner with investors meant romantic evenings at expensive restaurants where they could pretend to be a real couple. Emergency conference call meant stealing away for passionate encounters that left him feeling guilty and exhilarated in equal measure. Young Valerie, now 18 and preparing for college, began to notice her father's changed behavior with the keen observation skills he'd taught her. "Dad's been working really late a lot lately," she mentioned to her mother one evening as they prepared dinner together, another meal Peter would miss due to urgent business. "The company is expanding internationally," Valerie explained, but she'd noticed the changes too. The mysterious phone calls he'd taken private, the expensive cologne that wasn't his usual scent, the way he seemed distracted even when he was physically present. "I followed him once," young Valerie confessed quietly, "just to see where he really goes for all these late meetings." "Valerie, you shouldn't spy on your father," her mother scolded gently, but there was worry in her voice. "I know, but Mom, I saw him go into that guest house across town, the one he bought for business meetings, but it didn't look like business to me." The daughter's sharp intelligence had picked up on details that a trusting wife had missed or chosen to ignore. Young Valerie had seen her father's car at the guest house at times when he'd claimed to be in important meetings elsewhere. She'd noticed credit card charges for expensive jewelry that never appeared as gifts for her mother. She'd observed the subtle signs of a man living a double life. "What did you see?" Valerie asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "I don't know exactly," young Valerie said carefully. "But something isn't right. Dad's different. He's lying about where he goes and what he's doing, and—" She hesitated, not wanting to hurt her mother but needing to share her concerns. "I think there might be someone else." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Valerie felt her world tilt on its axis, 23 years of trust and love suddenly feeling fragile and uncertain. "That's impossible," she said weakly. "Your father loves us. He would never—" But even as she said it, Valerie remembered all the missed dinners, the forgotten anniversaries, the way Peter seemed to be living a life that no longer included his family. The signs had been there, but she'd chosen to attribute them to business stress rather than face the possibility that her perfect marriage was crumbling. Young Valerie watched her mother's face crumble with the realization that her worst fears might be true. The intelligent, perceptive teenager who had inherited the best qualities of both her parents was about to take matters into her own hands. If her father was betraying their family, destroying the love story that had defined her entire life, then someone needed to expose the truth. And if her mother was too trusting or too afraid to investigate, then it would fall to young Valerie to protect what was left of their family. The stage was set for the discovery that would bring Peter's house of lies crashing down around him. A teenage daughter who'd learned to be observant and strategic from watching her father build his empire was about to use those same skills to destroy his secret life. Peter William, consumed by passion and justifying his betrayal with business success and personal entitlement, had no idea that his own daughter was about to become the instrument of his downfall. Chapter 7. The Daughter's Investigation. Young Valerie Williams had inherited more than exceptional genes. She possessed her father's strategic brilliance and her mother's emotional intelligence, creating a formidable combination that would prove devastating to anyone foolish enough to betray her family. At 18, she was nobody's fool. The conversation with her mother had confirmed what her instincts had been screaming for weeks. Her father was living a double life, and that deception was slowly murdering her family from within. While her mother seemed paralyzed by the possibility of betrayal, young Valerie felt only cold, calculating determination. If Peter William thought he could destroy their family for some midlife crisis fantasy, he was about to learn that his daughter was every bit as ruthless as he'd taught her to be. "Time to find out what you're really doing, Dad," she announced to her reflection, her jaw set with the same stubborn resolve that had built Peter's empire. "And when I do, you're going to face consequences you never imagined." Young Valerie's investigation began with forensic precision that would have impressed FBI analysts. She started by hacking the family's financial records, a skill learned from her computer science classes, discovering the guest house purchase buried in corporate expenses 6 months ago. Cross-referencing credit card statements with Peter's claimed whereabouts revealed a pattern of deception that made her physically sick. Expensive dinners on nights he'd claimed to be working late, purchases from jewelry stores that coincided with emergency business trips. Most damning of all, hotel charges during times when he was supposedly in back-to-back board meetings. "Interesting," she murmured, cross-referencing credit card statements with her father's claimed whereabouts. The pattern was damning. Charges for expensive dinners on nights when he'd claimed to be working late, purchases from luxury lingerie stores that coincided with business trips, and most tellingly, regular visits to high-end hotels during times when he was supposedly in back-to-back meetings. Her next step was physical surveillance, a skill she'd learned from watching too many spy movies, but executed with the methodical precision of someone who'd inherited her father's business acumen. She borrowed her best friend's car and followed Peter discreetly, documenting his actual activities versus his claimed schedule. The truth was worse than she'd imagined. On a Thursday afternoon, when Peter had told the family he was in crucial negotiations with Pentagon contractors, young Valerie watched from across the street as her father's BMW pulled into the guest house driveway. Minutes later, a sleek red Porsche arrived, and out stepped a woman who definitely wasn't conducting business, at least not the legal kind. Rebecca Martinez was everything young Valerie had feared: sophisticated, predatory, and clearly comfortable playing the role of the other woman. She watched through binoculars as Rebecca let herself into the guest house with a key, as if she belonged there, as if this was a routine they'd established over months of betrayal. "You bastard," young Valerie whispered, her heart breaking for her mother while rage filled her chest. "How could you do this to us?" She documented everything: license plate numbers, times, photographs taken from a distance that clearly showed her father and Rebecca together. But she knew that photographic evidence wouldn't be enough. Her mother would need irrefutable proof, something so devastating that even her trusting nature couldn't rationalize it away. That's when young Valerie decided she needed to see inside the guest house, to capture the affair in action in a way that would leave no room for doubt or denial. Research into surveillance equipment led her to a high-tech electronics store where she purchased a state-of-the-art wireless camera system using money from her college fund. The tiny device was virtually undetectable, capable of streaming high-definition video directly to her laptop, and could be activated remotely from anywhere. "This is for a school project," she told the suspicious store clerk, her practiced smile hiding the fury and determination burning in her chest. "We're studying corporate security systems." The most dangerous part of her plan was gaining access to the guest house to plant the camera. Young Valerie spent days observing the pattern of Peter and Rebecca's meetings, learning their schedule, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Her chance came on a Tuesday, when she knew her father was legitimately in a board meeting downtown. She'd called his office to confirm. Rebecca's Porsche wasn't in the driveway, meaning the house would be empty. Young Valerie had picked the lock, a skill learned from YouTube videos and practiced on their garden shed, and slipped inside like a ghost. The guest house was even more damning than she'd imagined. This wasn't a business meeting space. It was a love nest decorated with romantic touches that made her stomach turn. expensive wine in the refrigerator, silk sheets on the bed, photographs of Rebecca strategically placed where her father would see them every day. "He's lost his mind," she muttered, her anger growing with each piece of evidence she discovered. In the bedroom dresser, she found jewelry that should have been gifts for her mother, love letters written in her father's handwriting, declaring his passion for Rebecca, and credit card receipts for romantic getaways that he'd never taken with his wife. Young Valerie positioned the camera in the bedroom with the skill of a professional operative, hiding it inside a decorative clock on the nightstand, where it would capture everything while remaining invisible. She tested the connection to her laptop, ensuring the wireless signal was strong and the video quality was crystal clear. "Perfect," she said grimly, looking around the room that represented the death of her parents' marriage. "Now let's see you try to lie your way out of this, Dad." Before leaving, she left a subtle calling card, rearranging items just slightly so she'd know if anyone had been there, ensuring she could track when the next rendezvous occurred. Then she slipped out as quietly as she'd entered, her heart pounding with a mixture of accomplishment and heartbreak. That evening at dinner, young Valerie studied her father with new eyes. Peter sat at the head of their family table, cutting his steak and making small talk about his day, while his phone buzzed with messages that he answered with the secretive smile she now knew was meant for his mistress. "How was your meeting with the Pentagon contractors?" young Valerie asked innocently, watching her father's face for any sign of guilt. "Productive," Peter replied without looking up from his phone. "Very productive. These government contracts are complex, but the payoff will be worth it." The ease with which he lied to his own family was breathtaking. Young Valerie felt sick watching him deceive her mother, who was trying so hard to maintain normal conversation despite the growing suspicion her daughter had planted. "Will you be working late again tomorrow?" Valerie asked her husband, hope and fear warring in her voice. "Probably," Peter said, finally looking up but focusing on his wife with the detached attention he might give a business acquaintance. "The Dubai project needs immediate attention, and the time difference means I'll be on calls until midnight." More lies. Young Valerie knew from her surveillance that Dubai project calls were scheduled for early morning, not evening. Tomorrow night was clearly planned as another rendezvous with Rebecca. "I wish you didn't have to work so much," Valerie said softly. "I feel like we barely see each other anymore." For just a moment, something flickered in Peter's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or the ghost of the man he used to be. But it was gone so quickly that young Valerie might have imagined it. "Success requires sacrifice," he said, the corporate buzzwords falling easily from his lips. "Everything I do is for this family, to secure our future." Young Valerie wanted to scream at the hypocrisy, to reveal right then and there what she knew about his lies and betrayals. But she forced herself to remain calm, to continue playing the role of the innocent daughter while she waited for the perfect moment to expose the truth. "I know, Dad," she said sweetly. "You're always thinking about what's best for our family." After dinner, young Valerie retreated to her room and activated the camera system. The guest house was dark and empty, but she knew that wouldn't last long. Her father's behavioral patterns suggested another meeting was imminent, and when it happened, she'd be ready. She spent the evening reviewing the evidence she'd already gathered, photographs, financial records, timeline discrepancies, building a case that would be impossible to deny. This wasn't just about catching her father in an affair, it was about protecting her mother from further lies and giving their family a chance to heal from the damage Peter's betrayal had caused. "I'm sorry I have to be the one to do this," she whispered, looking at a family photo from happier times when her father's smile had been genuine and her mother's eyes had sparkled with real happiness. "But someone has to protect what's left of our family." Young Valerie had transformed from a trusting daughter into a strategic operative, using every skill she'd learned from watching her parents build their empire to tear down the lies that were destroying it. She was 18 years old, preparing for college, and planning to expose her father's adultery with the cold precision of a seasoned investigator. The camera was in place. The evidence was mounting. All that remained was waiting for Peter to give her the final proof she needed to destroy his double life once and for all. The trap was set, and young Valerie Williams was ready to spring it. Chapter 8. Truth Revealed on Her Birthday. October 15th should have been a celebration of love, family, and 23 years of marriage. Instead, it became the day Valerie Williams discovered that her perfect life was built on lies, and her fairy tale love story was actually a tragedy. The morning began with heartbreaking optimism. Valerie woke early, humming as she prepared breakfast for her family, still believing today might mark a turning point in their struggling marriage. She wore the blue dress Peter had once said made her look like an angel, bought his favorite coffee, planned his preferred breakfast. "Happy birthday, Mom," young Valerie chirped, bounding into the kitchen with a wrapped gift and a smile that barely concealed the rage she'd been carrying for days. "Thank you, sweetheart," Valerie replied, embracing her daughter. "Where's your father? I thought we could have breakfast together as a family." Young Valerie's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. She'd been monitoring the camera feed since dawn, watching her father arrive at the guest house at 7 a.m. with fresh flowers, expensive champagne, and lingerie that should have been birthday gifts for his wife. "Conference call with Singapore?" Young Valerie lied, unable to shatter her mother's hope before she had devastating proof to show her. Something about emergency contract modifications. Peter materialized at 9 a.m., freshly showered and wearing his most expensive suit, phone already buzzing with what he claimed were urgent international calls. "Happy birthday, beautiful," he said, kissing Valerie's cheek with the mechanical affection of a man performing his marital duties. "Sorry, but I need to make this quick. The Defense Department moved up the Syrian project deadline, and I'm in crisis meetings all day." Valerie's face crumpled, hope dying in her eyes. "But Peter, it's my birthday. You promised we'd spend the day together." "I know, and I hate it," Peter lied smoothly, checking his Rolex with barely concealed impatience. "But this contract is worth $500 million. I can't let personal celebrations interfere with national security projects. We'll celebrate tonight, I promise. Maybe book that European trip you've been wanting." More lies, delivered with practiced ease. Young Valerie watched her mother's heart break in real time, saw the exact moment when trust shattered into devastation. "Of course," Valerie said quietly. "I understand. Business comes first." Peter grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, pausing only to call back. "Order yourself something nice for lunch. Put it on the company card, and maybe book that spa day you've been wanting." He was gone before either woman could respond, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the wreckage of another broken promise. Young Valerie activated her laptop the moment her father's car disappeared down their driveway. The camera feed from the guest house showed Peter arriving within minutes, but he wasn't alone. Rebecca's red Porsche was already there, and through the high-definition camera, young Valerie could see her father's mistress waiting in the bedroom wearing nothing but black lingerie and a predatory smile. "The bastard," young Valerie whispered, her hands clenching into fists as she watched her father embrace Rebecca with a passion he hadn't shown his wife in years. What happened next was even worse than young Valerie had imagined. Peter hadn't just brought flowers to his mistress, he'd brought the exact arrangement that should have been his wife's birthday bouquet. Sunflowers mixed with roses, the combination he'd given Valerie on their first anniversary, now being presented to the woman who was destroying their marriage. "These are beautiful," Rebecca purred, accepting the flowers that belonged to Valerie. "What's the special occasion?" "It's my wife's birthday," Peter said without a trace of shame, "but I'd rather spend it with you." Young Valerie felt physically sick watching her father's betrayal unfold in real time. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated cruelty that defiled every sacred moment of their family's history. For the next several hours, young Valerie forced herself to watch and document everything, building an irrefutable case while her heart broke for her mother. She watched Peter and Rebecca make love with a passion that had been absent from her parents' marriage for years. She listened to her father declare his love for another woman in words that should have been reserved for his wife. Most devastating of all, she watched him present Rebecca with jewelry that Valerie had been hoping to receive for her birthday. Meanwhile, downstairs, Valerie spent her birthday alone. She decorated her own birthday cake, wrapped her own presents from Peter, expensive items ordered by his assistant, and tried to maintain dignity while her world crumbled around her. At 3:30 p.m., young Valerie could no longer contain her rage and heartbreak. Her mother was sitting in the living room, staring at her birthday cake with tears streaming down her face, while her father was 20 minutes away making love to his mistress and promising her a future that belonged to his family. "Mum," young Valerie said softly, connecting her laptop to the large television screen in the living room, "there's something you need to see." "What is it, sweetheart?" Valerie asked, wiping her tears and trying to smile for her daughter. "The truth about where Dad really is right now." At exactly 4 p.m., as Valerie sat alone lighting candles on her own birthday cake with trembling hands, young Valerie made the decision that would destroy their family forever. "Mom," she said softly, connecting her laptop to the massive television screen, "there's something you need to see, something you need to know about where Dad really is right now." "What is it, sweetheart?" Valerie asked, wiping away tears and trying to smile for her daughter. "The truth about the man you married." Young Valerie activated the live camera feed and shouted the words that would shatter their world. "Mom, look what Daddy is doing!" The 75-inch screen exploded with high-definition betrayal. There was Peter Williams, husband of 23 years, father, the man who'd built their fairy tale life, naked and passionate with Rebecca Martinez, while his wife sat alone on her birthday. But the video was just the beginning of the devastation. The audio was crystal clear, every word a dagger to Valerie's heart. "God, Rebecca, you're incredible." Peter's voice filled their living room as he kissed his mistress. "So beautiful, so passionate. Everything my wife used to be before she got old and boring." Valerie's gasp of pain was audible, but young Valerie forced herself to keep the feed running. Her mother needed to hear everything. "These flowers are gorgeous," Rebecca purred, accepting the sunflower arrangement that should have been Valerie's birthday bouquet. "What's the special occasion?" "It's my wife's birthday," Peter said without shame, "but I'd rather spend it making love to you. She's probably sitting at home feeling sorry for herself, wondering why I don't love her anymore. If she only knew it's because I found someone who actually understands what a successful man needs." Valerie's scream of anguish shattered the silence as she collapsed to the marble floor, her birthday cake exploding in a shower of chocolate and frosting. 23 years of marriage, a lifetime of trust, obliterated in seconds of absolute truth. "Turn it off," Valerie sobbed, but young Valerie knew her mother needed to see the complete scope of the betrayal. "No, Mom, you need to know everything. You need to see what he really thinks of us." The camera captured Peter presenting Rebecca with jewelry, the diamond earrings Valerie had been hoping to receive for her birthday, now being placed on another woman's ears, while Peter told her she was worth every penny. "My wife wouldn't appreciate these anyway," Peter said, fastening the earrings on Rebecca. "She's lost all sense of style, all ambition. You understand luxury, understand what it means to be with a powerful man." Each word was another knife to Valerie's soul. This wasn't just physical betrayal, it was the complete rejection of everything she was, everything they'd built together. "He gave her my jewelry," Valerie whispered, hyperventilating as the full scope of his deception became clear. "He's using our anniversary song as background music. He's wearing the cologne I bought him for Christmas." Young Valerie documented everything with tears streaming down her face, knowing this evidence would be crucial, but hating every second of her father's cruelty. She watched Peter mock their family life, complain about his demanding wife and needy daughter, promise Rebecca a future that belonged to them. "I'm going to leave them soon," Peter told Rebecca as they lay together in post-coital bliss. "Just need to figure out the divorce settlement. But you're my real family now, baby. You're everything I actually want." Valerie vomited then, her body rejecting the poison of his words as surely as her heart rejected the man she'd loved. 23 years of her life, reduced to an inconvenience he needed to figure out. I can't breathe," Valerie gasped, clutching her chest as a panic attack overwhelmed her. "He doesn't love me. He never loved me. It was all a lie." Young Valerie knelt beside her mother, both women sobbing as they watched the destruction of everything they'd believed in. The camera showed Peter and Rebecca planning vacations to places he'd promised to take his wife, discussing business deals that would eliminate his need to pretend with his family anymore. "We have to leave," young Valerie said through her tears. "We can't stay here and pretend this didn't happen. We can't keep living his lie." Valerie nodded weakly, understanding that their old life was murdered. The man she'd loved for over 2 decades, trusted with her heart and soul, had chosen someone else. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, completely. They packed their bags while Peter was still at the guest house, still making love to his mistress, still believing his secret was safe. Young Valerie helped her mother gather important documents, jewelry and photographs, the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Before they left, Valerie wrote a single letter that she placed on Peter's pillow. "We know everything. The cameras, the lies, the complete betrayal of everything we built together. Your daughter watched you destroy our family on my birthday. We're leaving, and we're never coming back. You chose her over us, so now you can have her. But you'll never have us again. The family you threw away." They walked out of their mansion at sunset, 2 broken women carrying suitcases and 23 years of shattered dreams. Young Valerie drove her mother to her sister's house, both of them crying as they left behind the only life they'd ever known together. Peter Williams had gotten everything he thought he wanted: his successful business, his passionate affair, his freedom from family obligations. But in just a few hours, he was going to discover the true cost of his choices, and it would be higher than any price he'd ever imagined paying. The perfect family was destroyed, the great love story was over, and the man who'd had everything was about to learn what it meant to lose what mattered most. Chapter 9. Desperate Pursuit. Peter Williams returned to his mansion at 11:17 p.m., humming Sinatra and carrying overpriced Italian food like a peace offering. He'd spent his wife's birthday making love to Rebecca Martinez for 6 hours straight, planning their future together while Valerie sat alone decorating her own birthday cake. The silence hit him like a physical blow. No warm kitchen lights, no sounds of life, just the kind of death-cold quiet that settles over crime scenes. But Peter was too drunk on guilt and passion to recognize that his world had already ended. "Val?" he called, juggling takeout bags from Romano's, her favorite restaurant, where he'd taken Rebecca for lunch that very afternoon. "Sorry I'm so late, sweetheart. Brought dinner from that place you love. We can still make this birthday special." The living room destroyed him completely. Valerie's birthday cake lay massacred across marble floors, chocolate and frosting smeared like blood evidence, candles scattered like broken bones. The massive television screen displayed frozen proof of his betrayal. Him kissing Rebecca with passion that belonged to his wife, passion he'd withheld from his marriage for months. The letter waited on their coffee table like a death certificate, written on their wedding stationery in Valerie's elegant script. "We know everything. Your daughter watched you destroy our family on my birthday. We're gone forever. You chose her. Now live with that choice alone. The family you murdered with your lies." Peter's scream shattered the silence as the letter fluttered from his trembling hands. His daughter had seen everything. His wife was gone. His perfect life was ashes because he'd traded gold for garbage. He ran through the mansion like a madman, bellowing their names, checking every room, hoping this was some nightmare he could wake up from. But their closets were gutted, their presence erased, their love for him officially dead. The letter fell from his trembling hands as the full magnitude of his loss hit him. Not only had his affair been discovered, but his own daughter had been the one to expose him. His 18-year-old child had watched him betray everything their family stood for, had seen him choose his mistress over his wife on her birthday, had witnessed the complete destruction of the love story that had given her life meaning. Peter ran through the mansion like a madman, calling their names, checking every room, hoping against hope that this was some kind of nightmare he could wake up from. But their closets were empty, their personal belongings gone, their presence erased from the home they'd built together over 23 years. Phone calls went straight to digital purgatory, both numbers blocked, cutting him off from the only people who'd ever truly mattered. The family photos lining hallways now mocked him, showing happiness he'd incinerated with his own hands. His first instinct was Rebecca. Surely the woman who'd helped destroy his marriage would offer comfort. But her response was ice-cold calculation wrapped in self-preservation. "This is a catastrophe, Peter," Rebecca said without preamble when he called, sobbing. "My reputation will be ruined. Your family drama will destroy my business, and I refuse to be collateral damage in your domestic crisis. We're done. Don't contact me again." The line went dead, leaving Peter alone with the wreckage of both his marriage and his affair. Rebecca, who'd convinced him to throw away everything sacred, had abandoned him the instant their relationship became inconvenient. For 72 hours, Peter became a man possessed. He drove to every conceivable hiding place: Valerie's sister's apartment, her mother's house, their daughter's friends' homes, even the coffee shop where they'd first met. Everywhere he found locked doors and hostile faces. "They don't want to see you," Valerie's sister Sarah told him through her chain-locked door, her voice dripping with disgust. "That little girl worshipped you, Peter. You were her hero, her example of what men should be, and you destroyed her faith in love itself. How could you do that to your own child?" "I need to explain," Peter began desperately. "Explain what? That you're a selfish man who threw away 23 years for some consultant? They're safe, they're together, and they're finally free of your poison. Leave them alone." The social destruction was swift and merciless. News of Peter's affair spread through their elite circle like wildfire, turning their perfect family into whispered gossip. Charity boards quietly removed the Williams name from donor lists. Business associates cancelled dinners and golf dates. The family everyone had envied became a cautionary tale about success corrupting good men. His business began to suffer as his emotional state deteriorated. Peter couldn't concentrate during meetings, missed important deadlines, and made strategic errors that cost his company millions of dollars. The Pentagon, concerned about his stability, put several major contracts under review. International partners questioned his reliability. The empire he'd built over decades started crumbling under the weight of his personal destruction. "Mr. Williams, you need to take some time off," his senior partner James Richardson suggested after Peter broke down crying during a board meeting. "Get your personal life sorted out before you destroy everything we've built together." But there was no sorting out his personal life. Valerie and young Valerie had vanished completely, leaving no forwarding address, no way for him to reach them, no hope of reconciliation. His attempts to hire private investigators were thwarted when the agencies refused to take his case. Locating people who clearly didn't want to be found crossed ethical lines they weren't willing to breach. Peter's physical health began to deteriorate along with his mental state. He stopped eating regularly, lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks, and developed a tremor in his hands from stress and guilt. The confident, successful businessman who'd commanded respect in boardrooms around the world became a broken shell of a man, haunted by the magnitude of his losses. Sleep became impossible. Every night, Peter lay in their king-sized bed, staring at the empty space where Valerie used to sleep, torturing himself with memories of their happiness and the crushing weight of what he'd destroyed. He'd replay their entire relationship, remembering every moment of joy he'd shared with his wife and daughter, understanding too late what they'd really meant to him. The guest house became a shrine to his shame. Peter couldn't bring himself to clean out the evidence of his affair, but he couldn't bear to look at it either. The lingerie he'd bought for Rebecca, the love letters he'd written, the photographs of their stolen moments together, all of it remained as testimony to the worst mistake of his life. Letters became his obsession, heartfelt, desperate pleas for forgiveness that he sent to every address he could think of. He poured his soul onto paper, admitting his guilt, expressing his devastating remorse, begging for just one chance to make amends. "My dearest Valerie and my precious daughter, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to let me try to make this right. I destroyed the most beautiful thing in my life for something that meant nothing. Rebecca was a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness that became a pattern of betrayal I can never excuse. You are my heart, my soul, my entire world, and I threw it all away for temporary pleasure that left me empty and broken. Please, just tell me how to fix this. Tell me how to earn back even a small piece of your trust. I'll sell the company, give away every penny, do whatever it takes to prove that you are the only things that matter to me. I love you both more than my own life, and I'll spend whatever time I have left proving that to you if you'll just give me the chance. Your broken husband and father, Peter." But the letters went unanswered, returned to sender, or simply ignored. The expensive gifts he sent, jewelry, flowers, artwork he knew Valerie would love, were returned unopened. Every gesture of remorse was met with silence that felt like death. Peter's friends tried to help, reaching out to mutual acquaintances who might be able to mediate. But the responses were always the same. Valerie and young Valerie wanted nothing to do with him, were building a new life without him, and had made it clear that his presence in their lives was unwelcome. "You need to accept that it's over," his best friend Marcus told him after another failed attempt at reconciliation. "They've been traumatized by your betrayal, Peter. That girl watched you destroy her mother on her birthday. Some things can't be forgiven." "I can't accept that," Peter said desperately. "I won't accept that. They're my family. I have to find a way to make this right." But as weeks turned into months, Peter began to understand that some mistakes are too devastating to overcome. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. He had gained everything the world said mattered: wealth, success, power, beautiful women who desired him, and lost the only things that actually mattered: the love of his wife, the respect of his daughter, and the family that had given his life meaning. Peter Williams sat alone in his empty mansion, surrounded by the remnants of a perfect life he'd destroyed with his own hands, and finally understood the true cost of his choices. He had everything, and he had nothing. He was successful beyond his wildest dreams, and more broken than he'd ever imagined possible. The man who'd had it all had lost everything that mattered, and there seemed to be no way back from the devastation he'd created. Chapter 10. The Reckoning and Resurrection. The letter lay on Peter's coffee table like a death certificate for everything he'd ever loved. The elegant handwriting that had once written "I love you" on anniversary cards now declared his family officially dead. "We know everything. Your daughter watched you destroy our family on my birthday. We're gone forever. You chose her. Now live with that choice alone. The family you murdered with your lies." Peter Williams, billionaire, empire builder, destroyer of everything sacred, collapsed to his knees and screamed until his throat bled. The sound echoed through his empty mansion like the death cry of a dying animal. 4 months of hell taught him what rock bottom actually felt like. Not the mansion echoing with emptiness, not the social humiliation or business collapse. Rock bottom was understanding that his daughter, his precious princess, had watched him betray everything sacred while her mother decorated her own birthday cake alone. The first week, Peter didn't leave his bedroom. He lay in sheets that still smelled like Valerie's perfume, surrounded by family photos, alternately sobbing and screaming at God for letting him become the monster who destroyed paradise. Rebecca vanished the instant scandal broke. Her phone went straight to voicemail. "I'm sorry, but this relationship has become too complicated for me to continue. Please don't contact me again." 24 hours of passionate declarations had evaporated the moment his reputation became toxic. Peter laughed hysterically at the cosmic justice. The woman who'd convinced him to abandon his family for sophisticated love had abandoned him the instant their affair became inconvenient. The second week brought desperate action. Peter hired the city's best private investigators, only to be told that pursuing his family would constitute stalking. He contacted lawyers about parental rights, who explained that young Valerie was 18 and could legally choose never to see him again. "Your wife has filed a restraining order," his attorney explained. "Any attempt to contact them will result in criminal charges. They've made their position clear. They want nothing to do with you." The third week destroyed his last illusions. Peter liquidated everything, the company he'd built over decades, the mansion that had housed their dreams, every material symbol of success he'd worshipped. He donated $50 million to organizations helping families survive infidelity, hoping karma might grant him one chance at redemption. Money couldn't resurrect murdered trust. Wealth couldn't restore love he'd poisoned with his own hands. The fourth week brought his heart attack. Alone in his empty mansion, clutching his chest as cardiac arrest nearly ended his story before redemption was possible. Paramedics found him unconscious beside family photos, his body finally rebelling against the stress and guilt that had consumed him. "You're 45 years old and nearly died from a broken heart," the cardiac surgeon told him bluntly. "Stress, guilt, and isolation are killing you. Change everything, or you'll be dead within the year." Peter chose change, not because he expected forgiveness, but because dying as the man who'd destroyed his family would be the final insult to people who'd already suffered enough. The transformation began in the hospital's cardiac rehabilitation unit, surrounded by other men who'd nearly died from stress, ambition, and the pursuit of things that didn't matter. Peter listened to their stories, successful executives who'd prioritized everything above family, only to discover success meant nothing when you had no one to share it with. "I built a fortune and lost my children," said Marcus, a hedge fund manager recovering from his second heart attack. "They won't even tell me when my grandchildren are born. Success is the most expensive drug in the world, and the withdrawal nearly kills you." Peter moved into a studio apartment in downtown's roughest neighborhood. Not from poverty. He still had millions despite his donations, but from recognition that he needed to remember what actually mattered. His neighbors were homeless families, recovering addicts, immigrants working 3 jobs to survive, people who understood loss, struggle, rebuilding from nothing. Sacred Heart Shelter became his salvation and his penance. "Why are you here?" asked Maria Santos, the shelter director, watching this former billionaire scrub toilets without complaint. "Learning what I should have known all along," Peter replied, "that serving people matters more than using them." The children broke him open completely. 8-year-old Timothy, whose father had abandoned them for a younger woman. 12-year-old Sophia, who flinched whenever men raised their voices, 16-year-old Kevin, who'd stopped believing good fathers existed. Peter saw his own legacy in their wounded eyes, another powerful man who'd prioritized everything above the people who'd trusted him completely. "My daddy said he loved us," Timothy confided one evening as Peter helped with homework. "But then he chose someone prettier. Why do daddies lie about love?" The question shattered Peter's chest. "Sometimes grown-ups make terrible mistakes," he said through tears he couldn't control. "We convince ourselves that other things matter more than the people who actually love us." But the love was real even when the choices were wrong. "Did you make mistakes like that?" Sophia asked with devastating honesty. "Yes," Peter whispered. "The worst mistakes imaginable. I hurt the people I loved most, and now they're gone forever." "Do you still love them?" Kevin asked, his teenage cynicism cracking slightly. "More than my own life," Peter said. "But love isn't enough if you prove it doesn't matter through your actions." 6 months of working with broken families taught Peter what he'd lost through daily exposure to the damage men like him inflicted. He witnessed the aftermath of betrayal, children who couldn't trust, wives learning to rebuild their identities, families slowly healing from trauma that successful, important men had caused through selfish choices. Dr. Elena Rodriguez became his therapist, not because he expected miracles, but because destroying yourself serves no one. "You replaced emotional intimacy with material provision," she observed during their first session. "You convinced yourself that working for your family was the same as loving them." "I thought I was being responsible," Peter said defensively. "Responsibility includes emotional presence. Your wife needed a husband, not a provider. Your daughter needed a father, not a financial system." The breakthrough came during their 8th session, when Peter finally understood the psychological pattern that had destroyed his marriage. "Success became your drug," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Each achievement gave you validation that temporarily filled the void where real intimacy should have been. But like any addiction, you needed more and more to feel the same high, until nothing else mattered." "How do I change that?" Peter asked desperately. "By learning to find worth in being rather than achieving, by discovering that your value comes from how you love, not what you accomplish." Peter's physical transformation was remarkable. He lost 60 pounds, his stress tremor disappeared, and the predatory intensity that had characterized his business persona softened into something almost childlike in its humility. But the real change was spiritual. He began attending 12-step meetings for work addiction, recognizing that his relationship with success had all the characteristics of substance abuse. "My name is Peter and I'm a work addict," he said during his first meeting, voice shaking with vulnerability. "I chose achievement over love so consistently that I destroyed my family. I had everything the world said mattered, and I lost everything that actually mattered." 1 year after his family left, Peter wrote a letter that was different from his earlier desperate pleas. No promises he couldn't keep, no dramatic gestures, no attempts to minimize the damage he'd caused. "My dearest Valerie and young Valerie, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for another chance. I'm writing to tell you that I finally understand what I destroyed. I chose success over love systematically, unconsciously, catastrophically. I convinced myself that working for you was the same as loving you. I was wrong about everything that mattered. Rebecca was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was my addiction to achievement, my inability to find worth outside professional success. I destroyed our marriage long before I betrayed it. I've spent a year learning to be human again, working with broken families, confronting the psychological patterns that led to my choices. Not to earn your forgiveness, I know that's impossible, but to ensure I never hurt anyone the way I hurt you. You were the greatest achievement of my life, and I traded you for nothing. Young Valerie, you were my masterpiece, and I taught you that love comes second to success. I love you both more than my own life, but I know love requires more than words. If you ever feel safe enough to let me try proving that love through actions, not grand gestures, just consistent presence, I'll spend whatever time I have left showing you who I've learned to become. If not, I understand. You deserved better than who I was, and you deserve peace more than my attempts at redemption. All my love, always, Peter. He mailed the letter without expectations, then returned to his work, his therapy, his slow reconstruction of character that success had poisoned. The crisis came 14 months later when Valerie's car was T-boned by a drunk driver. Young Valerie, terrified and alone in the hospital waiting room, made the call she'd sworn never to make. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking with fear. Peter arrived within minutes, having abandoned everything the instant he heard his daughter's voice. When he saw young Valerie, scared, crying, needing her father despite everything, he broke completely. "Is she alive?" he choked out. "She's in surgery," young Valerie said, and for the first time in over a year, let her father hold her while they both wept. The man who embraced his daughter wasn't the cold businessman who'd destroyed their family. This Peter was gentle, present, focused entirely on her needs rather than his own guilt. When she shivered, he gave her his jacket. When she couldn't eat, he brought her favorite soup. When she needed to cry, he held her without trying to fix anything. "You're different," young Valerie observed during their 18-hour vigil. "I'm trying to be," Peter said simply. "Not for forgiveness, I know I can't earn that back, but because you and your mother deserved better than who I was." When Valerie woke up, weak but breathing, she found two faces above her bed. Her daughter and the man who'd shattered her heart but never stopped being her child's father. Over weeks of recovery, something impossible began happening. Peter's presence wasn't demanded or manipulative. He simply made himself available, asking nothing, giving everything. The changes in him were profound, fundamental, impossible to fake. "He sold everything, Mom," young Valerie said one afternoon. "The company, the house, everything. He's living in a tiny apartment and working with homeless families. He's not trying to buy forgiveness. He's just different." The conversation that changed everything happened in the hospital garden, 24 years of history hanging between them like a bridge that might hold or collapse. "I need to understand," Valerie said, her voice clear with purpose, "how the man I loved for 23 years could do what you did." Peter was quiet for a long moment. "I became addicted to success. Each achievement gave me validation that filled the void where real intimacy should have been. I needed more and more, until nothing else mattered." "When did I stop mattering?" Valerie asked, the question that had tortured her for over a year. "You never stopped mattering," Peter said, his voice breaking. "But I stopped choosing you. I convinced myself that working for our family was the same as loving you. I was wrong about everything." They talked for hours about betrayal, healing, whether love could survive such destruction. Peter owned the damage without reservation, explained his journey without expecting sympathy. "I've learned to live without you," Valerie said finally. "I'm stronger than I knew. I don't need you anymore, Peter." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm hoping you might choose to want me back. Not because you need me, but because the man I'm becoming might be worth loving again." Young Valerie found them as the sun set, talking honestly for the first time in years. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, Dad, but because that's what love does. It forgives the unforgivable and rebuilds from ruins." Looking at her father, genuinely transformed, committed to proving redemption through actions rather than words, young Valerie made her choice. "Maybe we should try. Not because it'll be easy, but because that's what families do. We choose each other, even after terrible mistakes." 2 years later, The Williams family had built something new from the ashes of their old life. Not the naive love story of their youth, but something deeper. Love tempered by loss, strengthened by choice, precious precisely because it had nearly been destroyed. Peter never returned to business. He became director of Sacred Heart Shelter, using his skills to serve rather than accumulate. Valerie returned to her art with new passion. Young Valerie chose psychology, wanting to help other families survive what theirs had endured. Their modest home prioritized connection over image, presence over possessions. Love was measured in attention rather than income, success defined by family happiness rather than financial achievement. The Williams family had been murdered by betrayal, but from its ashes, something even more beautiful had emerged, a love story about second chances, earned forgiveness, and the possibility that people can genuinely change if they're willing to do the hardest work of their lives. Their fairy tale had ended, but their real love story, messier, harder, infinitely more honest, was just beginning, and this time Peter Williams knew exactly what mattered most.